Hello, welcome back to Rev Endurance Sports and another edition of Industry News. Today we're going to talk about two topics about e-bikes. We'll start off with a recycling program and we'll finish off with 5 reasons that a couple of industry figureheads believe 5 reasons why the e-bike industry could suffer. Okay, so let's start off with the first one, and it's about a recycling program. Let's see, it's the first U.S. electric bike battery recycling program, and what they're trying to do is create enough recycling sites around the country to take on these batteries that are coming from these e-bikes. And so obviously this is a hazardous waste, right? This lithium is not something you want just in your regular groundwater, in your ground, and then end up in your groundwater or any of that stuff. So what they've done thus far, it's been about 7 months, and they've got about 1,500 sites. And in these 1,500 sites, they've collected 2,379 batteries, so an average of about 1.5 battery per site, and they're up to about 15,000 pounds of batteries. And so, this is a brand new thing. It's only been out about 7 months, and they're trying to get a lot more people to get on board. So you have to get on with People for Bikes, and then get the listing of Call to Recycle. That's with the number 2 in the name, Call to Recycle. And they've currently got 35 OEMs, so original equipment manufacturers, which then includes about 51 brands. And there's a link I could provide that shows all the brands that are actually participating in the program, but they just got to get the word out to enough manufacturers and enough individual consumers so that they then have the knowledge that, oh, okay, there is a place for me to take this battery, and who knows what we're going to do with the rest of the bike, but at least the battery part is being considered. And if you think about this as I lead into story number 2, this is not going away. So like anything else, infrastructure sometimes seems to follow in a delayed reaction to what a problem comes from, some new technology, some new thing. And, the infrastructure is trying to catch up with a thing. All right, so in this case, let's move on to story number 2, and those 5 things that they believe, these two gentlemen believe, they were interviewed, and they believe these are things that could hurt the e-bike industry. So if we look back 5 years, the e-bike market has grown 300%. So that's pretty good. It's pretty good business to be a part of. I do more servicing. I don't do any sales here of e-bikes, although I have been approached by a few brands, and I may consider it. One of them is a local brand here in San Diego, so I'd like to support that type of a brand because they're local. Okay, so these two gentlemen, and so his name is Peasy. He is the CCO of Alta Bicycle Group, I believe it was, and then Dr. Lovell, who is the e-bike policy and campaign director for People for Bikes. All right, so this is an interview by those two gentlemen, or of those two gentlemen. Number 1, out of category bikes. So the 3 categories, so class 1, class 2, class 3, and I'll go into that, they were established with a legally and signed into law back in December of 2002. So this really isn't the Wild West, Wild West, but some companies are doing things that are manufacturing bikes that do not fall into these three categories. So class 1 and 2 is limited to 20 miles per hour. And that number came about, that 20 miles per hour came about as a metric of an athletic rider, an athletic person, the speed that they could maintain on flat and level ground, 20 miles per hour. Now, I think that's a little optimistic, but yeah, sure, okay. An athletic rider, an athletic person could possibly ride their bike 20 miles per hour, but that's a max speed. That's not, or I should say, no one averages that for any length of time, right? So now you're sitting on an e-bike, and if it's got a 50-mile range or longer, you're sitting there at 20 miles per hour for as long as that battery lasts. So that's not typically what an athletic rider can do. But that's where that came about. So class 1 and class 2, and that was equivalent to about 1 horsepower, and that's where the motor regulation of 750 watt, that's where that came from. Okay, so what the problem is that there are OE, original equipment manufacturers, who are building bikes that are outside of these categories. And so with higher speed comes a higher potential for accident, injury, and sadly some deaths as well. So this is a very important thing where, if you're importing a bike and yeah, it looks great that it goes 20 plus miles per hour instead of 20, but you're still trying to import it as a class 1 or class 2 bike. These two gentlemen say you're breaking the law by doing that, by bringing in a bike, by importing a bike that does not fit into this 3-class structure. Let me make sure I have that. Oops, sorry. Yeah. Once again, if you don't conform to that, then there should be law enforcement, but there hasn't been, right? So number 2, and this is inexperienced riders riding these e-bikes. And I've mentioned it in previous videos before. I believe in the concept of you have to earn your speed. Earn it by having the experience to ride at those speeds. You have stuff on the road, bike paths, you have kids on bikes, you have this kind of, little kids on bikes that are on pedal bikes, and here you come on your e-bike at 20 miles per hour. Do you have the skill level to stop in time? Do you have the skill level to swerve and not go into oncoming traffic of other riders, if you're on a bike path? So lots of things that you need to have gained the experience of riding at speed and knowing how to handle a 50-pound e-bike, right? So these things don't stop on a dime. They accelerate pretty quickly, but they don't stop on a dime, but they don't handle as quickly either, especially if they're on really fat tires, right? The handling is way different than, let's say, a road bike, or even just a beach cruiser with a 2.1 tire on it. Some of these e-bikes have like 4-inch tires. Anyway, so people are buying these bikes. They don't have the experience to ride them. So it's okay. So what type of education or what type of programs are provided after the sale, right? If you're a business and you sell the bike, hey, wash your hands of the whole thing. I sold a bike, I made money, put money into my account, and off. The rest of that is on you. So People for Bikes, I guess they did an intro to e-bikes video at one point. But is a video enough? I don't think so. I think a little bit more hands-on approach. I as a bike shop would, I mean, it'd be quite taxing. I don't know, maybe I could do it, on every third Thursday of the month or something in the parking lot and go through some safety classes and maybe put some cones out and do some handling things. Maybe, who knows, maybe that's a new business opportunity for me. But it looks like California, being one of the leaders in this type of safety and education, they're looking towards the CHP, the California Highway Patrol, to provide a safety course, training, and education. The funny thing is that these two gentlemen are blaming the education system as failing to educate kids on e-bikes, because they say, well, they're not going to get any real safety training until it's time for them to get their driver's ed training before being licensed drivers. So, we have, 15 and a half, 16 time frame years old. That's when, they're going through all this other stuff. But what about the 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids that we see on these bikes? And if they're not being educated according to these two gentlemen, it's a failing of the education system. That's pretty harsh. Honestly, I think it falls on the parents. I mean, that's your child. You want them to be safe. I believe it falls on the parents. But then again, how many of these parents really know enough on how to teach their children how to ride an e-bike? I don't know, right? But so then we go to number 3, and that is online bike sales. Now, you can buy these bikes online fairly easily, but then when it comes time for the building of the bike, the servicing of the bike, the ongoing maintenance of the bike, things to look for, just like anything else, you should have a daily inspection of your bike before you get out on the road. It doesn't take much time as an experienced cyclist. You know what you're looking for real quick. Yeah, your tires are good, your chains are okay, and you can head out. But are kids being taught that? I mean, they ride the bike, park it in the garage, get back on the bike, go back out, right? And one of their concerns were not only the assembly and these kinds of things, but what happens if someone doesn't have a positive experience with a bike that they bought online? Would that then deter them from buying a second e-bike for maybe another child, or, for the spouse? Or will that bad experience or not so positive experience move them from an online consumer to a brick and mortar consumer, because maybe they had a poor product, a bad and poor performing product, and said, I'm not going to do that again. That $1,000 e-bike just wasn't worth the amount of money that I thought I saved on it. I'm going to go into a brick and mortar. I'm going to buy a well-known, well-established bike brand that I think have done the due diligence to provide me, the consumer, with a quality product, whether that be Trek, whether that be Specialized. And so they walk in, and now they have more peace of mind by buying a bike from one of these established brands. And then number 4, age. Now, I've talked about this before on my channel a lot. I've talked about it previously as we've been talking here. Is there a minimum age? I mean, I see kids here, honestly, they can't be more than 10 years old. I don't see that. Not to mention there's all these smaller bikes too, with much smaller electric motors and batteries, and they're riding them, and they're tiny little kids trying to ride with their bigger brother or sister. I just don't think that that is what they should be doing. I think they should be pedaling, but that's just my opinion. But they believe that it's going to be these two gentlemen, so Mr. Lovell, Dr. Lovell, and Mr. Peasy. They believe that can't be a federally mandated age limit. It has to be at the state and local level. Which I guess, getting a motor vehicle license, I guess that's by state level. I'm not sure. I guess every state has a different licensing criteria, and what age you can begin your permitting, and how long you're going to be in a permit situation, and then move on to a full-fledged driver's license. So I guess that's where they're going with that state and local authorities would then determine what that is and would enforce it. So they did mention, like, for example, in Germany, 11 years old is their minimum age, but they've also got a much smaller motor of only 250 watts, and it's a 15.5 miles per hour. Now, of course, they're in Germany, so that's going to be in kilometers, but this is a U.S. article. So 15.5 miles per hour, which I guess is safer if you're 11 years old than another 4.5 miles per hour. I mean, I guess that reduces the stopping distances by a few feet as opposed to a 20 mile per hour. But I still think 11 years old is far too young. And if you recall, I did a previous video on the family who is suing Rad Power Bikes and Giro Helmets because their 11 and then I guess became 12-year-old daughter died as a passenger of an e-bike with an 11-year-old piloting this e-bike, and they crashed. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be smiling. This is a very tragic situation. She had a bad fall, I guess was in a coma, and eventually died. So, I think 11 years old is still too young. That's just my opinion of this. So that's that for number 4. Number 5 is the conflict of where these bikes are being ridden. And I believe some of you have already mentioned this. Some of you viewers have already mentioned this when you're out riding. The way they originally designed these 3 different classes. So class 1 was for that class 1 e-bike could be anywhere that a regular pedal bike was allowed, to include natural surfaces. I'm going to maybe throw in that means trail, right? Natural surfaces. Number 2 was almost anywhere except natural surfaces. And number 3 was higher speed roads, but not multi-use paths. Now, the problem they're having, as they claim, is that bikes are being produced without the sticker. And so they're putting this on the OE. So they're building these bikes, they're being imported, they're not following the law of you have to have a sticker. What class is this bike? And so the consumer is riding the bike and doesn't know what class it is, does not know where they are allowed and not allowed to be with this bike. And then the enforcement of these classes is difficult because there's no sticker on the bike. I don't know if I buy all of that, but yeah, there has to be some responsibility on the OE. But again, I think it falls on parents for their kids, the adults who are riding them. They know what they purchased. They something online or even at the bike shop when they from the brick and mortar. They have to know what are the limitations. What is the spec? I mean, you'll know if you want a 28-mile-per-hour bike, you're being sold a 20-mile-per-hour e-bike. You'll know the difference, vice versa. So I don't know who actually should take all of this burden, but in the end, they're saying, look, the land managers and what else did they say? Local authorities and things like that. They determine where bikes can be ridden, and then if you're not riding, or if you're riding a bike that is not allowed to be on that multi-use trail or the their natural surfaces as they claim, then you should be cited. The bike should be impounded. There should be some cost to you breaking the law. And then, of course, the importer and the manufacturer should also conform to the law. These bikes are this, these bikes are that. And if they are not labeled or they're something different, then that manufacturer they're breaking the law. They should also be impacted by it. Okay, that's all for today. Went a little long, but that's okay, because if you come to my channel, this is what we do here. If you want super, super quick things, go follow TikTok videos. We talk about things, we develop an idea, and I provide as much of my own commentary as the information that is given to me in the first place. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you up the road.